We're here today for a few reasons. Partly to welcome these three artworks, plus this carved cross by Cole Isaacs, and the three works by Marshall, joining them into the exhibition. And they fit in with the Anthropocene theme of humans modifying the landscape, and these paintings are about Marshall Bell's, some of his later works about carved trees. So that's part of the reason they're here. But also we thought we'd take the opportunity to honour Marshall, who passed away 10 years ago. And so we'll start with Marshall's wife Rose and daughter Sam. They're here to say a few words.
Thank you, Michael.
Sorry, microphone.
So what's this all about? My son and my daughter, Collis and Sam, and I were talking about this very important time of honouring their father and my husband. And 10 years was coming up for us, and we thought, and a lot of my grandchildren and my son and daughter and myself we're thinking of a few things, and my sisters we're thinking of a few things that we could do. And in talking with Michael, my dear friend and cousin, Michael's had a very strong relationship with Marshall and myself, and with Marshall since the very first time that I met him. So he says, if you're wanting to do something for Marsh, why don't you have it at our place at UQ? So I said, thank you, Michael. And he introduced me to Mundine, and I met Mundine, and I like what they had to say, and I like that they were honouring my wishes. That firstly, this is a time for my children and my grandchildren, my siblings and my elders, and Marsh's family, and more importantly too, Marsh's family. So I have been speaking with Paulie Spearim all the way, and I said that I would really love for him to be involved in anything that we have to do at UQ. So thank you, Paulie. And thank you to my elders, Auntie Peggy, and thank you to my pop, Gordon Barney. Thank you for coming today. Gord, you had a beautiful relationship with Marsh. Thank you. So that's what, and I guess that's what today is all about. 10 years. For the last 14 years of my professional work life, I've been involved in a number of jobs all around Australia, nursing, Brisbane Catholic education. But the last 14 years was very special for me because it's been at a beautiful place called YFS in Logan. And my team there has become my family. And my family are here today. For the last 14 years, they have heard me constantly talk about Marsh this, Marsh that. This is what Marsh would say. One of my teammates thought, Rosie, I thought Marsh was still alive, the way you talk about him. But no. So I thank my workmates for being here. They have been such wonderful friends for me, tolerating all those conversations about Marshall Bell. So it's very important that I share that with you, firstly, because Marshall was a very strong family man. He loved his family. He loved his Gamilaroi, his Kuma, his Jiman family. Strong. He grew up, he was raised by a strong Gamilaroi woman and a strong Jiman man. And his Kuma relatives from Cunnamulla have been in his life forever. Marshall being a strong Kuma, strong Gamilaroi Kuma Jiman man with all of his family around him and supporting him. He married me, and I was so lucky. I was so lucky to meet this wonderful man, Marshall Bell. And together, so thank you for coming today, to be a part of this, to be a part of honouring Marshall's story. So Brenda Croft was a very, very special friend to Marshall, to the Bells. And she said to me, Rose, this is 10 years ago, Rose, if you ever need anything, just call me. But we have been talking, and she would have been here tonight, only very sad. She was, she had to stay back home because of sorry business. So with that, with Brendan not being here, I thought that I might. Brenda was going to talk a lot about Marshall's art life. And I don't know what else she was going to talk about, but mainly that. But I thought I'd read an excerpt. For the last 5 years of Marshall's life, he had an exhibition every year. Every year. And for each of those exhibitions, he wrote an essay. And for each of those exhibitions, he had a professional colleague to comment on his artwork and his essay. So for this particular, was his last exhibition, the Gamilaroi tree carvings, southeastern Australian tree carvings, art. He wrote this essay to go with his artwork. He painted about 20 paintings, and they're from the Gamilaroi tree carvings. So I'm just going to read you the importance of why he did this exhibition, why he did these paintings. In the 80s, I used to make and sell boomerangs, and in my time, I would have made and painted thousands of them. I used to make them from the trunk and root of black wattle. It was really hard digging and cutting out the roots. Traditionally, it was timber, the timber used as it is a strong timber that wouldn't break easily when thrown. When they are fired up, they became really light. The natural shape and the grains give extra strength, made from the trunk and the root. It gives a bit of a spring as it hit the ground. I loved the different colours and the grain in the black wattle, how the grain follows the curve of the boomerang. I love the smell of wattle and the smell of wood generally. I love painting on the finished smooth surface. It was this connection to timber that gave me the desire to search for old ways of Aboriginals using timber. I had known about and seen tree carvings. I did a small tree carving as part of the Campfire Consultancy showing at the 1992 Sydney Biennale. The Sydney Biennale piece had a goanna, as the central image, appearing as a ground carving, tree carving and multimedia piece. Multimedia piece referenced possum or kangaroo skin, hence the gridding. Elements of these three art forms on animal skin rugs and blankets, trees and ground carvings, I have continued to use through to today. My last solo exhibition looked at art on animal skin rugs, blankets. This exhibition is predominantly on tree carving art. Hopefully my next exhibition will be on ground carvings. As part of my last exhibition, Why You Paint Like That, I wrote an accompanying essay and developed it into a paper that was delivered at the 2010 Cairns Art Fair Symposium. In that essay I wrote, "Art on the skin is why I use the grid design in my paintings, and I cling so strongly to it. It is why I have retained and developed the gridding for this exhibition." Again, the animal skin gridding, it is a reminder of the disappearance of southeastern Australian art style, of the annals of Australian art. Just like tree and ground carvings. Further to this, I wrote, "For me, this is an important part of my traditional art, therefore I consider it important to me. I feel the same way about tree and ground carvings. I am connected to this art through my ancient bloodlines. This bloodline is an authentic connection to what I consider my ancestral art style. It has factual basis to it, and I believe it is a continuation of native title. I have a matriarchal ancestral line through my mother to the first Gamilaroi woman put on Gamilaroi country. It is through this ancestral line that I have inherited connection to Gamilaroi animal skin, rugs, cloaks, ground and tree carvings, rock paintings, rock etchings, artefacts, stone arrangements, and wood carving art. This art is my inheritance, and I intend to use this Gamilaroi ancestral inheritance in developing my art. I will use this inheritance in gathering information to collate that information along with gathering oral histories to collate both information." That is why, in that Why You Paint Like That exhibition essay, I went some ways as to why I am doing these writings and the associated artworks. Another reason is the way assertions to exclusive ownership of regional art styles have been imposed into the consciousness of the Australian art industry. These assertions are exclusive ownership and art styles and symbols. This has been translated as meaning Indigenous peoples of southeastern Australia have no culture, have no language, have no songs, have no dancers, and have no art. Therefore, southeastern Australian art is not real Aboriginal art. The makers of these untrue assertions wholeheartedly believe that Aborigines from elsewhere are the only real Aboriginals, and their art is the only real Aboriginal art. This document, my essay, builds further on possums and kangaroo skin rugs, cloaks with evidence, by showing tree carvings have more examples of circles, dots, cross-hatching and Aboriginal symbols, and is widespread throughout southeastern Australia. In the Why You Paint Like That exhibition essay, I asserted that by using an archaeological style predictive modelling method, I could say these art styles and symbols proliferated throughout southeastern Australia. This tree carving exhibition and essay indeed backs that assertion.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was beautiful, Mum. You know, we've been... Just talk up?
Yep.
Right. A little bit ago, it was my daughter's 18th birthday, Bali. And so it's been very emotional, you know. Bali was... How old were you, Bali, when Pop passed away? 8. Now my little Ngiri, she's 8. So I suppose what I want to do is to share a little bit of my story with you. when I was reading the card that you wrote, said honouring Marshall's life work. Well, to me, honouring my father and how he lives in his life and how he lived in his life, what that means to me is me teaching my children, talking to my mob. I can see you all over there. And that's something that I will always do and have done and been taught that. It's something that Marsh gave me, my dad, you know. I've got two fathers. I'm blessed to have two fathers. And Marsh is why we're here tonight, and I'm so happy to share a little bit of memories with you. It means that I'm blessed to have two fathers, strong Aboriginal men who knew who they were, where they come from, and they shared that with me differently. Marsh, I remember driving in we went down to the Mish there, to Wellington to pick collop. You know, and I remember listening to Cold Chisel. I remember the first time that I listened to No Fixed Address, and I thought, deadly. I felt so strong because Marsh was strong. And I couldn't believe it, like my spirit was the same. So and now I teach my children, we play them, not every NAIDOC day or week or whatever, like all the time. It's how we roll. Honouring my father, Marshall Bell, means that I will carry the love that he gave me. And you know what? My story doesn't start when Marsh came into my life as a little girl. It actually goes back to my grandmother, my great-grandmother, Gram, who her name was Bali, who I named Bali after, because Gram was sick, Mum was looking after her, and all the mob we were all together. And Mum, and we all knew it was close for Nan, Gram to go. Mum told me she asked the Creator to heal her heart, and then Marsh stepped into her life. Yeah, we got to, and Gram, we shared good time with Gram and Pop and like all the mob because we were close to Nan, like really close, like lived in, and we still are, even though they're above. I'll share his strength and his resilience and his passion for his culture, which he's given to me. You know, I remember in 1988, we went marching for Invasion Day. Mum said to Marsh, don't get locked up. And you were there that day, a lot of faces were here. And I followed Marsh. Marsh jumped the fence, and I jumped the fence. And because they were passionate, strong, Uncle Coco was there, that's something that I remember holding my heart. And I remember the fence got pushed down, and Michael actually took a photo of my little brother, my cousin, Jason Graham. He was standing on top of that fence, and that was a black and white photo. That was powerful. That just captured it all, what young, old, we're here, we're still here. Yeah, outside Parliament House, yep. In 1988.
1991.
Hey?
1991.
1991 there. See? I've got so many, all of these, I'm only sharing a little bit of stories with you, but these I will carry in my heart, and I really, since Ngiri, Jayamba, Nellie, Merrigan, is that? They were born after Pop passed, so we share those stories. We openly talk about it, like he is here, because he is here, and they talk about Pop and have a relationship still to this day, and for always. It will be forever, carrying that story. And so Collie Boy was a little fella, so I just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Rose and Sam. So we've got organised some important speakers here today. Djon Mundine has flown up from Sydney via Darwin to get here. He's been on the plane all night. And Paul Spearim. So Paul, I remember you were there at the opening night of this exhibition in 2012 at Wollongabba Art Gallery, and you were involved in, in really this whole process. So you want to talk about Marshall and this exhibition where these artworks are exhibited?
Well, first of all, Yamagara Ninda Niga Winningali-Ji. Winningali-Ji in my language means that's my name, to speak and to listen from the heart. I come from Kabun Gunigal. Kabun Gunigal Bume, Kabun Gunigal Dada. Kabun Gunigal Bume is my mother's line of descent. Kabun Gunigal Dada is my father's from Ashford, Texas, and Ngurubal country, which goes up into the mountains. That's my father's group, where he comes from, his language group. But I first met Marsh in 1979, and I was at an Aboriginal hostel in Sydney called Kirinari. And Marsh and my nephew and brother Rich, I'm not sure if he's here, they all hung around together back then. And then from 79 right through the 80s and then 90s, we kept in contact every now and again. And then I moved up here to Brisbane. I was teaching at Kangaroo Point TAFE at the time. And I bumped into Marshy and Rose there, and they were looking after some youth hostel out at Anala. And we reconnected again. But we not only reconnected again on that old friendship that we first started in from 79 onwards, but we reconnected on that matriarchal line of descent. Because within Gamilaroi, that matriarchal line of descent belongs to every single person. Man, woman, child, animal, everything, the plants. So that matriarchal line of descent in our language is Guwe margin. Guwe margin can be seen in a lot of the diamond-shaped etchings which are found on dendroglyphs or dendroglyphs, which are the carved trees. Guwe margin is the matriarchal line of descent, which is the dark blood group. Then Guwe margin, Guwe Galia is everybody's line of descent from Gamilaroi. And that's also these markings here that you find with the circles on it. So each design that Marshall depicted when he was starting this exhibition back then, we sat down and had a yarn about, okay, we can't take the actual designs and markings and etchings, because in our language we call it mube, because you scarred your body, you scarred your tree, you scarred that rock, you scarred that cave, or anything that do with mube, the painting on your body or on trees, you have to change it every time. It cannot be exactly the same. So a lot of the designs and a lot of times that he did his painting, each changed a little bit. Each time he painted, because that's through law. In our language, Diriya Gummel, because you can't take what's planted in the ground by them old people through law and put that on your body. It has to be changed every single time. So that's Guwe margin and Guwe Galia. Those two bloodline descents also bring in our moiety. And as Rosie mentioned there earlier, his mother's bloodline. And that's that Guwe margin, Guwe Galia, his mother's line of descent. I have to take that bloodline descent, but I have to take my father's tongue. That's where I come from there. Even though I'm here belonging to my mother and all the Gamilaroi people, but my tongue, my language, my Guwe, my house, my gumbu, comes from my dad's land. But everything is connected and can be seen in all these dendroglyphs or dendroglens, these carvings that are found on trees. And one time we were sitting down before the exhibition, we sat down with Uncle Reggie Knox there now, who is a deadly old strong cousin of ours that spoke a lot of our language and was one of our last speakers of our language. And he said the similar thing to Michie. He said, okay, every time you do it, just change a little bit. Because we can't take that law from that there law ground or them trees and put it out here. They have to change. You know what I mean? So they have to change every time you did a design. And that continued, that concept of continuing that law process. Because when he taught or teaches anybody else, for example, after this exhibition, and when he did this exhibition, we all had language there, language speakers, dancers, and all that. But then he started a project down at Dreamworld where he did carvings there. And he had a couple of the boys that are going to be here later, they're going to be dancing. But he taught them about wood carving and how you take these designs from these old law stories and place them in these carvings that they have to change, because we can't take that law from that ground and make it our own. It belongs to every single person. But those designs have to change. They cannot be exactly the same. I mean, downstairs or at the back, we've got some old carved trees that are over 200 plus years old. And they belong to Marshall's bloodline descent through his mother's matriarchy. They come from Kaupo and Gunigal. You know, they're over 200 plus years. So those designs that are on there can't be taken from them because they were law trees. They were placed there by these old people for a reason. It could have been because that lawman was very important. It could be to say, okay, here's the edge of our land here now. There's the other people's land over there. Whether it's Gummel, Cooma, Bigamball, Wiradjuri, Gidabal, those are the landmarks that differentiated each mobs. So when you look at designs like this, and it goes back to that, what Rosie mentioned there earlier, they thought that the only people that did artwork was people from outside of New South Wales or outside of the East Coast. But this is our story. They told us these stories, because who would have thought that cross-etchings, circles, lines meant that, okay, here we have our matriarchal line of descent, and here we have everybody's line of descent that comes from Gamilaroi. That's telling us a story of where we as Gamilaroi people belong and where we come from. Because it teaches us our law. It teaches us about our creation and where we are from. All Gamilaroi people come from. So that's our stories. And that's what these paintings depict. You know, here we got Warraba, right behind me, you know. I mean, he was the older of law within Gamilaroi that went from the Namoi River, right through to Walgett. That their story alone, on the back of his shell, when he was given the permission by our Creator to go out and capture and take law, he etched it on every single shell. The markings on any turtle, you will find the shell, the carvings on it, they calculate up to 360 plus days in a year. That's how long Warraba took to capture all these laws from within Gamilaroi and outside of Gamilaroi and bring those laws back to us so that we can build within Gamilaroi our own concept of law. And that's what you'll see on the back of Warraba. And those designs, if anyone's been down at Dreamworld, that was about Warraba, the story there, and the importance of Warraba. Why was Warraba allowed to go and capture these stories, take these stories, to make these stories a part of Gamilaroi also? And it goes back to us learning the concept of matriarchy and patriarchy, but not patriarchy, so matriarchy and the concept of law itself. And now we, as Gamilaroi people, Marshall, Richard, and all those bloodlines that come after them too, belong within that concept of Dhiriyaagama, law, within Gamilaroi.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Paul. So, I guess talking sort of museum politics, we have some of these very important carved trees here in our museum. I guess, as a museum worker, I defend museums. There's a reason why museums exist, to collect things, to preserve things. And to look after things for future generations, for people to use, for Aboriginal people to connect with. And, you know, the fact that these designs are ending up in these artworks is an example of Aboriginal people using things in museums to create, to maintain culture. But also there's some things that I think shouldn't be in museums. There's things that were stolen. And the history of these trees go back just prior to this museum even being formed, back to 1947, where a group of academics or researchers cut down 100 or so of these trees in a very brutal way, brought them, some ended up in South Australia, some in Victoria, and half a dozen of them have ended up here in this, literally behind this wall here. And Djon Mundine has been involved in attempting to repatriate those and many other trees from the region. So Djon's had a long history in the arts, cultural museum industry. So Djon, do you want to talk about the importance of those trees and them being repatriated?
Thanks, Michael. If you can hear me. I thought you were going to say I took part in taking the trees away from it. But anyway, I'm a bit of an intruder in this, because I didn't know Marshall as much as some other people here. Thank you for your comments about your partner and your father. The main thing about what I was told, that the main thing about if you speak is to speak what you feel, and what you feel for Marshall was very evident here today. That was very beautiful, that he should be remembered like that. I also wondered what this whole thing was that was going to happen today. I think it's very appropriate that in this year, during NAIDOC week, people were talking, the theme of NAIDOC week was for elders, for the elders, that we remember them. And there's no more appropriate metaphor for these two brothers, Richard and Marshall. One has become very famous. I'm told he's one of the 100 top named artists in the world, and other people that do many things, that work within communities, do many things within communities that seem to be not noticed. I think just remembering raising a family, being a partner of someone, is as important as anything you can do. We talk about bridging the gap. Bridging the gap means that you should do these things, to do the little things. I think I wrote a paper about a Welshman earlier in the year, the patron saint of St. David of Wales. His motto was to do the little things. And if you look after your family, if you give them meaning, give yourself meaning, but you give them meaning, make them feel that they should exist, that they are important in the world. That is the little thing, but the most important thing that you can do in the world. I know my own parents taught me that I should exist, that I had meaning in the world, and hearing you two speak really moved me a lot about this man is a very important man, even for that alone. The carved tree project that I worked on was to try to extract these objects back from being locked away in a museum, where no one would see them. No one would see them at all. They might have been sacred objects that could only be seen by certain people, but those Aboriginal people couldn't see them even. No one knew, I think, that they existed. It was to bring that back to the community to say, look, you have these objects, you have this art practice that was all over the state. It was very important to you. As you were explaining before, about how it's embedded right, or woven right through the whole society. It's a law and a way of socialising, of how you have manners, how you talk to other people, how that gives you authority to be in the world. So I think that was the project I was trying to do. Someone told me there were these, they'd seen this film that Michael, we were talking about before. There was a film made of where they cut these trees down in Gamilaroi land and took them away. It was like we talk about stolen, whatever it is, What the British Stole, that TV show. This has meaning in this instance, what the colonial people took away. And they not only took away the physical objects, they took away the intangible thing within that society. They took away the spirit of that society. They took away, like I said, a spirit of feeling that you exist, that you should exist and belong here. It's a type of abuse to take away intangible things, to make people feel inferior and have nothing. And that's the project that I tried to work on. I set up a number of meetings in Moree, in Narrabri, in Coloranabri, in Walgett, and in Sydney, to try to bring this to people. These things exist. They're in various museums, and as is the colonial practice, they were then swapped around. So one museum, one white person, usually a man, anthropologist or whatever, would say, look, we'll swap, we've got 6 of these poles, we'll swap you some and you give us some of those dead bodies that you've got, or your skulls or whatever. And these were traded around like they were playing cards. And in this really obscene, inhuman trade. And that's why I wanted to be involved in that. The other part of it was, we were talking about restrictions. Some things are restricted. They're seen to be sacred and they're restricted. The idea was to not make anyone do anything. The thing was to allow other people to create a discussion about, well, all right, these are very sacred, but how do we deal with these things now? Are they still totally restricted? Are they by gender or age, etc.? Or do we embrace them and start to use them again? And it's really incredible seeing Marshall's work here, where he wasn't afraid as an adult Aboriginal person to embrace the use of the most sacred things within his society. As an adult Aboriginal person, you have not only a right, but you have a responsibility to embrace and use these designs and the stories and lore that you were describing before, and to see an Aboriginal adult person being responsible in a truly intellectual and social practice is something I didn't know fully what he did before, but this is really inspiring. It's inspiring. It's really emotionally moving for me to see people in the southeast who have been totally written out of the art world for so long, really totally written out start in the 80s and the 90s, and into this time start to reassert ourselves. It's really a pain that I carried, that people from the southeast weren't stepping forward and making those statements and making a belief or exhibiting the belief in themselves as Aboriginal people. I also ran into Marshall really later in my life, in the 90s, I think it was, when we were on a panel, an institution that was set up to protect the copyright of Aboriginal art. And this institution, or like a company, was set up to take people to court for copying Aboriginal imagery, including the art of southeastern Aboriginal people. We ran, I think, about 4 very major Aboriginal cases in court to assert, to really drive home that Aboriginal art was protected under the Australian Copyright Act. Because up until that time, there was this really weird attitude that Aboriginal art was not protected under the Copyright Act. It could not be taken to court. You couldn't drive that home. And Marshall was on that committee with myself. Fiona Foley was on that committee. And we ran these cases and won them to prove that it's now known that all Aboriginal art is protected under the Australian Copyright Act. You can't copy it. Or the 3 things are in that copyright is, one is reference. You have to name the artist if you're going to reproduce it. The second is that they should be paid something. And I think the third is that of fair trade. You can't disrespect that art object. You can't take these paintings, put them on toilet paper or on tea towels, etc. You have to treat them with respect. And they were the things we fought about in that committee, with that committee, and we ran those cases and won those cases. So the 2 things I really was moved about with Marshall, and just the way, certainly in Queensland, how things have turned around. His reinterpretation of an historic sacred lineage of imagery. He said, this is my imagery. I think in this here, there's a comment you were quoting from his other essays, that he says in here that this is me, this imagery, and that he can interpret it and do what he wants to do with it. But he has to bring it out so he can show his family, he can show the next generation. One of the biggest things that colonisation does is to break the generational bond. In colonisation, you will find that many missionaries who want to take your children and teach them about Christianity. They want to teach them about Western ideas and Western practices, but they will keep older people away from those, that generation, to break the generational bond. And this is a major step in bonding that back together. So sorry, I've spoken too much. We've got time limits here. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Time's good. I just want to acknowledge Marsha's son Collis has arrived. He's here, a bit late. And just, I'm looking at how many Aboriginal people, community people, family are here today, and thinking back to the 1970s and early 80s when Aboriginal people didn't feel welcome in places like this. And still don't in some places, yes. We do our best here to make people feel welcome. Yeah. Acknowledging Bob Weatherall's here, we'll ask Bob to say something. But
Yes.
and Bob, an expert. Bob, would you like to say something? Expert person on museum policy and connected to Marshall.
But it's just wonderful to be able to come back and see what we always have had. And it's just been reinstated every time a Gamilaroi artist stands up and exercises their right to be creative. And obviously through all the obstacles during the years, from places like this who couldn't give us back our cultural materials, our works of arts and those sorts of things, so that we could still maintain the ceremonies and the stories and understand our kinship roles and responsibilities to our lands and people and to the environment and to every other animal custodian who is our real custodian, who makes our law, who govern the way we live in our communities. They taught us how to govern ourselves in the seasons and whatever else. Them old men and women enhanced those laws. Those laws are customary laws for caring for country, growing up country. And they believed that when they passed away and died, that they would rest in peace, and they had faith in their customs and their traditions, that they would rest forever. If I don't give that back to a son or a daughter or to somebody in here, and to maintain the songs and the dance and the laws of them old people who we had to deal with, they are the men and the women who were deep in law. In those days when they said go overseas, go everywhere and find our ancestors and bring them back.
So looking, as I said, looking back 1970s when Aboriginal people really didn't feel welcome in institutions like this, it really wasn't until the 1980s that Aboriginal people had the confidence to really knock on the doors and challenge institutions like this. And Bob was there at the forefront, knocking on doors. Human remains is one of the most important issues that needed to be dealt with, and he's been doing it ever since. So thinking about that, I remember, acknowledging the work that Dr. Peter Lauer, who was a director here at the Anthropology Museum from the late 60s into the 1980s, how he did everything he could to make this museum a safe place for Aboriginal people. I was one of those people. In 1985, I started working with him. He found a bit of government funds to employ me, acknowledging, people that he made feel welcome here. People like your cousin Reg Knox, Jimmy Edwards, Ron Hurley, Fiona's mum, Shirley Foley was here as well. So many Aboriginal people. I think, John, you mentioned before, you came here and there was a dozen Aboriginal people all doing different things. So this is a safe place. Starting with Peter, we've done everything we can to make this museum a safe place where these discussions, important discussions like Bob's talking about, can happen. And just going back to the reason why I even had the idea to have this event and involve Rose and the family, because I remember I started studying here in 1987, and I remember how scary even the libraries were. As an undergrad, we had the undergraduate library. It was the only one I was game to go into. And I remember the fear of going into the main library or I think it took me 3 years before I went in the biological science library. It seemed like a foreign territory. I think it wasn't until my 4th year before I had the confidence to walk into the law library and look for a book. It all seemed so intimidating. But in my last year studying here in 1990, I walked into the Fryer Library, you know, our very important research library. We've got the current director here, Simon Farley. And there, I couldn't believe it, there's Marshall Bell sitting there with young Sam and Collis. They were quite young kids back in 1990. And I'm like, I've been here at this university for over 5 years. I've never seen a black fella come in off the street and use the library. It's the first time. I said, what are you doing here, Marshall? He said, I'm doing native title research. And so acknowledging Marshall's confidence, he's untrained, never been to university, but we've been talking, Rose read his writings. John's been, you know, going through his writings. They're academic, of an academic standard. They represent somebody who wasn't afraid of institutions like this. And now things are changing. They're not totally perfect, but they're changing, and Aboriginal people are confident in places like this. So we've been taking a bit of time. So Collis, we've got two Collises here now. No. Okay, and then we've got Cole. So Cole, can I get this Cole up? Just say, Cole's the carver that carved the cross that was at... So Cole carved this cross that was at Marshall's funeral. So if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, well, first of all, I met Marshall back in 1976. He was a young and up-and-coming artist just like myself at the time. He was on my country, on Michie, and I'm also NGAYI, an extended family to Nguru people. But at the reference points to Marshall, we got on like birds and bees. I called him Mudge, and I accepted him as my brother, and he was a guest of my country. And therefore, I was responsible for helping him and prove that part in the country during the 70s. And when he left Sydney, we kept in touch, and what can I say? When I got the news that he'd already passed, I was like a stunt mullet, I suppose. I was in a bit of a shock. And Ron on Spearim was telling me that he was looking for a cross and couldn't find one. So this piece of timber, by the way, I went and collected it from Tasmania. I was down there and I was thinking, I'll take this piece because my ancestral roots go down that way too. And it was laying around, and Bronwyn come along and said, and George, Greg, said, we're looking for a cross. And I said, well, where are you going down? And they said, we're going up to the funeral. And I said, well, tell you what, take a break, go down the road, have something to eat, look around town, and come back this afternoon. So I just gung-hoed into it. And that was the designs that Marshall was on to send down. And I thought, okay, I'll do that, and I'll do the Spirit travelling, and it's going to Miami, no problem. But like I said, it was an honour and a privilege to do it for him. And it's the only way I can say I've got my personal connection to Marshall.
And I'd just like to ask Father Jerry Heffernan to come up. Jerry's been very important to Rosie's life, my life, Marshall's. Just to say a few words.
Thanks, Michael. I have a painting that Marshall did in 1991, and it's in my living room, and it's a blessing that I start each day looking at. And at that time he was talking about in his paintings who he was. And speaking to Rosie and to your mum and to your grandmother, I'd asked them first, and then I asked Marshall, could you, looking from the outside, being inspired by Quandamooka people, how would you paint their spirituality? And it's the first time I ever found him nervous, because he's moving out of his own mob, to try as best he can in consulting. And so he painted that, and so I'd just like to say that he could see the blessing of others, and he painted that in that instance. So we thank Marshall for the gift of who he was and who he is, but also for the blessing of who he could see in others and affirm them. And we ask our Creator's blessing on all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Father John.